Martha. Thanks, Jack. Thank you. Thank you. Martha.
Martha Teka. I'm also with Share and have been working with Jen and Jeff and Jack. I have the wrong first initial apparently, to coordinate, help pull this group together. Delighted to see everybody here. And I'm on the screen twice because I'm going to have to leave in a little bit and I'll be doing the rest in my car, but I just wanted to be on for a bit for I could be on the screen.
Thank you. And Millicent.
Not sure she heard you, Jen.
Got it.
Did you call on?
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
Sorry, Millicent Cooley. I've been volunteering with the refugee program for around a year, just doing general, often driving or welcoming people at SIT, taking, orienting and giving them orientation drives around town and taking them activities. And I've recently shifted my focus to training, transportation training, training on independence with transportation.
Awesome. Thank you. So we're going to talk about just our impressions of the Key Mindsets content. I'm not going to start. Well, actually, I am going to say, I actually really like the content. I think as a person who's very focused on like doing, I really appreciate the importance of this, and Martha's really good at, and Jeff are really good at sort of, reminding us how important it is to think about how we are and how we are with people and how we are with this work. So I really enjoyed it. I feel like I need an infinity more time of sort of, in terms of processing it. And I also am concerned about, which we'll get at sort of towards the end, but just this, how hard it is to get folks to dig into this kind of a thing. So I think it's really important content, and I also think it's really easy to avoid. So that's sort of that. Those were my impressions. There are a few of us here that I'm perfectly happy to like let us popcorn it, and I don't want to like just call out people. So people like raise a hand or jump in.
I
would just say, go ahead, Millicent. Go ahead, Millicent.
I don't need to. Okay.
Mhm.
I'll just list it. I took a little notes. I like the content also generally overall. I really like the nuance in the description of the friend definition in number 4. And I also feel like I'd like to get a better grasp of that, of what it says, through discussion or whatever, listening to other people. And these are just some other thoughts that came up while doing that. That these mindsets are really, they're really great principles. Wondering, just thinking about the importance of also having those mindsets within the volunteer community, from the leadership to the volunteers and the volunteers to each other within this community, because that's the foundation for us to also do that with, for volunteers to do that, those mindsets, to practice those mindsets with the newcomers. So the importance of that. For example, if community humility is missing in the volunteer culture or the refugee program culture, it's going to make it harder for volunteers to understand and learn how to show cultural humility towards newcomers in some way, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For myself, just a reflection that I put it in the reflection notes that I sent in. I think that personally, I could imagine being prone to this adopting mindset. And I can think of a specific example where I've, about my kind of my feelings about one particular refugee family, because I have a childhood history of being kind of semi-adopted, almost legally adopted within another family unit. And it made a huge difference in my life. I'm, tremendously grateful for it. But then I could also see like projecting that or misapplying it onto newcomers who have a serious need, it's like an emotional, response, right? And it's not necessarily what the newcomers need, but it's something that I have, in my own background. And then just wondering, kind of related to that is a motivation to watch out for, or imagine volunteers feeling like they're being a hero. We think we're doing service to, but if there's like sort of sense of martyrdom, that's could be like not necessarily the most constructive. I was thinking a few times of the way Juliet shared last time about, I thought it was what she said was really delightful about she has a background in fashion and just and clothing, and seeing how people express themselves with clothing, and how much fun it is for her to go and carry me home and like make all these observations about what different individual refugees like. She talked about one, oh, this guy's a style dude, or this person likes green. Like she just takes pleasure in that process. And I think that that's a really positive and fun I don't know, it's a fun, really, really great, it's a fun perspective and an example of a perspective that is really positive and brings joy to the process. That's it.
Thank you, Millicent. That was really thoughtful. That really was. I appreciate it. I guess I'm reminded because of some other discussions that are going on that this is, and we all like this and honor it. This is about community sponsorship, which implies that a community is organized to do this. And in particular, that there may be, and it refers to these specific teams or groups of people that work with a family or individual, but that there's relationships that build. I am taking note at the moment that the number of people flowing into Brattleboro, maybe not the Upper Valley, but into Brattleboro, is so high that this may be an unachievable goal. That is just, and there is no, so I'm leading this off, I'm sorry, Jen, but it's what's on my mind.
Okay.
That there's some difficult distance from community sponsorship to what's actually achievable. And a lot of that has to do, to Millicent's point, about with training, with coaching, with how do you manage relationships, which could be done in a lot of different ways. But I'm afraid it isn't. So I want to celebrate the community sponsorship ideal. We've practiced it. We believe in it at St. Michael's. I think the local region does, but it's hard to get there just in terms of the volume of demand in front of us. So just an operational puzzle, but it's a real one. So I liked reading all this stuff. Like Millicent, that I really enjoyed it, to be reminded of it, but I was also reminded that in some circumstances, it's a long reach from where we are to being this wise and mature and practiced and trained and coached, etc. So just I was also just wanted to say, I was also reminded that I've looked through this key mindset thing at least 3 times now over the last several months. And each time it gets better, meaning each time I find more in it and it speaks to me in a way that is, oh, right, that's right. Yeah, now I think, yeah, that's right. So it's, that was interesting to me, was that it didn't get thinner over time. It actually got thicker over time. And with that, I will stop.
Next.
Yeah.
I came into reading this section with kind of low expectations because I thought that 101 was really 101 and kind of basic. And I thought, oh my God, now I have to read this next thing. And I was so delighted to find it really meaningful and thoughtful and with a lot of depth. And I also saw so many places in the world where this sort of compassion and empathy can be applied. And I was really kind of happy to see it kind of laid out in this, little acronym is always a good thing. I love the term cultural humility. I mean, I'd never heard that before. And I thought, wow, that just, just even those two little words together really can pack a lot. And, when I think about cultural humility, I mean, cultural can mean a lot of different things in terms of socioeconomic status or, I mean, there are just so many ways that I can apply it to things that I'm already doing, much less thinking about a new population of people who need support when they come to the United States. I was really, I learned a lot and was incredibly pleasantly surprised that I did. And just one more thing, I'm sort of dealing with a situation with somebody who's working with prisoners or people leaving incarceration who is really struggling with compassion and sort of saying, well, so-and-so didn't do this and they're just looking for a handout and da-da-da. And I thought, wow, I want them to come take this training or just even read this section to help adjust the mindset about having empathy for the trauma of incarceration, having compassion for what the work is, not imposing shame because someone's not up to the snuff of what their expectation is. I mean, sort of all of those things. And and I actually am going to somehow try to borrow some of this to deepen the conversation that I'm having with this other person. So that's all. It was good. Yay.
That's great. Yeah.
And actually, Jeffrey, I had the question for you just when I heard about, is it hard to recruit volunteers? Do you have difficulty? Because I would think that he's laughing. I guess so.
Well, it's a complicated situation down here because I'm associated with St. Michael's. We have recruited our own batch of volunteers and formed up a bunch of teams, and we sponsored 5+ families over the first year and a half of this stuff. And then we slowed down because we were all tired and we kind of backed off. And at the same time, ECDC lost a key person and kind of lost, frankly, sight of what they were doing. So the co-sponsorship, the focus on co-sponsorship effectiveness and management declined. So they have built a group, and Millicent has been one of them, of volunteers who volunteer directly to ECDC and kind of managed kind of out of the home office on a dispatch basis. Like, can you do this for that family or this for that family, rather than the team approach that we use. So that's a long way around to say, A, the function kind of changed. B, the recruiting process by ECDC itself has not been particularly effective. They've been over-challenged, under-resourced, can't get their message quite straight and out to the community. That's been a real challenge here is to get all that lined up and put together and communicated so that you've got a good flow of volunteers who are well trained and prepared and ready to work either in teams or in some effective way as individual contributors. Sorry for the long answer, but that's we've been greatly puzzled in that area, really challenged.
Yeah, just to throw my 2 cents on top of that too, which is to say, we built on a base of a couple hundred really great CASP volunteers, but if you really add it all up, there are a lot of really wonderful volunteers, but have resettled about 15 people over 5 years. And it's very hard to get people to do the things that have to get done. And so co-sponsorship is really all about a team doing all the things that have to get done for someone. And it's not about a lot of the fun stuff. So that's really the challenge, right? There's fun stuff, but it really is about something serious to this. It's not, yeah. So it's a, in many ways, I think for in a perfect world, it's more rewarding for some people, but it is very different to structure co-sponsorship as an organization to support that versus to just manage a bunch of volunteers that you kind of like, we need a Spanish translator to show up at the emergency room for 2 hours. You just send out an email blast. It's very different. So, yeah, it's not just ECDC that struggles with it. What I've sort of learned is sort of nationally, it's hard to pull off. Worth doing if you can, but real hard to pull off.
Right.
So.
And the flow of refugees into the area, it was so great during the Afghan crisis, and even now is so high that the agency struggles to cope with that. Just the flow itself, much less building a volunteer contingent to do co-sponsorship and or other kinds of things. So, which
is, I think, Martha, you should wait because talking about the capacity issues.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, sorry, I'm like mucking with 2 different mics, so I wanted to make sure. Thank you. One of the things we've been struggling with since the very beginning in the Upper Valley is actually a lot of interest in volunteering, a lot of capacity to be helpful, and not enough capacity to like latch on to those volunteers and sort of either give people the appropriate training as necessary that will make them feel comfortable, or most importantly, just really, even with support teams around the individuals and organizations that we are helping, and we have 7 or 8 different support teams with quite different individuals and groups of people involved. For those support teams, it's hard to just bring somebody else in, right? Because you have built some relationships, and now it's somebody saying, hey, I want to drive. I just want to drive. Tell me what to do. And you're sort of, well, where can we plug this person in where we don't have to give them any information about this person who still doesn't speak perfect English? Or do you know what I mean? It's just, it's a little bit challenging. And that said, we're in a particularly kind of messy phase because we've got a bunch of asylum seekers that are coming, that have been supporting in a kind of a less.
Oh, we lost your sound.
Than this Welcome Corps training would, not less complete, but sort of a less structured process than the Welcome Corps training would suggest. And we have some welcomed some folks with the structure that were, with the structure as guidance, but just impractical for us to actually accomplish, given how quickly we were trying to do things. Anyway, so I, like you, Bartlett, when you read this this particular piece of the training, this was a massive light bulb for me. It was just like, if in fact a bigger, broader part of our community, whether they're assigned to be helping refugees or assigned to be helping, formerly incarcerated people, if more had this kind of mindset, then we would be able to be doing some of the things we need to do with people when they come. We just in the last week have had 2 couples, one with a baby, arrive in the Upper Valley from Venezuela. And they're not sort of shares responsibility. We got connected with them because somebody who ran into them knew, like me in one case, and knew about, someone else who was working with us in another case. And so we're bringing the connections of share, but they're not even, certainly not in a co-sponsorship mode yet with the families. But hopefully we're bringing the right mindsets to the table so we can begin to welcome them in some way and figure out, how can they stay, or can they stay? Anyway, the mindsets piece, because, and I'm saying this to Bartlett specifically, because we actually have in the Upper Valley a number of people who've said they're interested. And our biggest issue, as I've said probably in every session we've been together, but our biggest issue is this coordination, is having some people who understand enough about what's going on that they can help with the coordination of all that interest that is out there. And as Jeff or anybody will say, there's always a lot more interest than there is practical, and from your own work, then there's practical ability to do this stuff. But I think there's more real interest than we're harnessing at the moment. So hopefully this whole just will be helpful to all of us.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Go,
Millicent.
Millicent.
Yeah, and I want to make sure we get the first impressions also from, I mean, you don't have to, Nick and Carolyn, if you want to weigh in and throw some elbows as you need to. So, but Millicent, oh, you're muted.
Yeah.
One, Jen, thanks for the explaining the issues around the challenges of how volunteerism is structured. That has helped me. That explanation has helped me to see some of the things that are going on. That said, it seems to me that there's value in having different kinds of volunteer roles that are more minor for people. I do think that they need to be explained much better. And I'm wondering if, like, hey, we need babysitters and this is all you can, this is what you're capable, but maybe that the whole thing can be thought through the modeling of volunteer as like in such a way that volunteers, prospective volunteers understand that in a way as kind of a pipeline into the co-sponsorship model, as opposed to simply an alternative to it. But it may be a way to learn about becoming a co-sponsor, for example. And what you'd have to really explain the value proposition, as it were, kind of corporate speak, but the value for doing that work of co-sponsor, because I think that people might hear it, prospective volunteers, as, well, it's a lot of work and then you have to raise money. But there's so much more value in that, right? Anyway, those are just thoughts about that problem. I have to stop there because I forgot the other one. That was it.
And I wanted to say also, I think, you're right, as far as being a pipeline, because, coming back to the key mindsets thing, there's a lot of stuff to learn and get good at and have to try out. And I think as a volunteer who's doing conversation partner or giving rides, you have a chance to sort of get a sense of what these concepts mean. I mean, all volunteers should do this kind of training, right? And many of them do, but not all of them do. And people should be able to have this kind of a conversation and say practice oh, I finally figured out what cultural humility means because I had this experience with somebody and I'm just a conversation partner, but I really am getting it, because it is there's a learning curve, right? No matter how competent you are in your real life to do this work, to be a co-sponsor, you have to be pretty proficient in a lot of practical things. And then all of this kind of tough psychological stuff, that's like, and I agree. I think that like a fully fleshed out volunteer ecosystem would allow people to, enter gently, gain expertise, downsize as needed, come back in, right? That and as you say, understand those options and see that more clearly. And again, if nothing else, that's a lot of what these conversations are about, is to provide opportunities to talk about it and make it visible and, and flesh that out. So Carolyn and Nick, do you want to talk at all about your just impressions of the content? And again, no is a fine answer.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I thought the content was really good, and I definitely related to a lot from, different things in my life, whether it was parenting, I mean, collaborating with your child even. I mean, it's totally different. And I don't mean to be, because certainly the relationship is not a parent one, but learning to put your own, learning to encourage the other person's voice as opposed to your own. And also traveling in Guatemala, and connecting with people there, and this awful feeling of being aware of my privilege. And if I'm taking someone to lunch, how do I make them not feel like I'm doing this for them? So so those things related, those things related to my experience. And in terms of the volunteer issues, I mean, I totally agree with Martha in terms of share that we have so much interest and so much trouble with coordination. But another thing I've noticed, which makes a lot of sense, is, I mean, one nice scenario is for people to learn by being part of a team and then eventually maybe become a support team leader later. What I've found often is the support team leaders, we want to send more people to them to help, but they also quite naturally want to make sure that their support team are people that are their friends, that they feel really comfortable working with, in some cases, not always. And so they're, which works really well if they have people they want to bring in. Sometimes it's challenging if they don't, but they want to make sure, I don't know, I'm not quite sure what I'm saying, but that's, matching people to the support teams can be sometimes challenging, let's say.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just want to sort of just around what Carolyn's saying, because I'm listening and trying to think about what that is. I think if the element of, if there's an already, and Jeff has talked about this, having this sort of tight culture of relationship in support of a given family, then the folks who are inside that relationship and who are making that want, you want to build that in a careful way. You want to add to it in a way that you're being very careful about who it comes in, and whether it's friends or whatever it is. I think there is, and if we from the outside are trying to help connect interest into we're sort of at a different place, trying to connect them into in and around support teams. That piece can be more difficult for who's doing the recruiting, right, and who's doing the connecting, and so it's a tricky piece.
Right. We were lucky that we had a base organization in the congregation itself. So we had a small community from which we were drawing people who at least knew about each other, if not knew each other. So they had another connection with each other, out of which we then could build these teams. And I'm surprised at how valuable that was. That really built some strength in those teams and amongst those teams, so that we could cross-fertilize from one to another, talk amongst each other, et cetera, and so forth. So just in terms of volunteer recruitment, some of your comments, that's what we did. But we also recognize the real limits of that. We're only so big. We're not infinitely expandable to the number of co-sponsorship teams that are needed in southeastern Vermont. We can't get there. So there's got to be another way to get more volunteers and more organization in order to that. Sorry, Millicent. Thank you.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to talk so much.
No, please.
We're here to talk.
I remembered what I was, a couple things that I forgot before. just wondering, and this is maybe what you already meant in your agenda point. Who needs this information and how do we get it in their hands? Specifically for this, what I call the category of support volunteers, people who are volunteers here in the program who are not co-sponsors, like what I've been doing. How can support volunteers be exposed to these concepts, key mindset concepts, so that they think about it, look at what it means for them, try to apply it, talk with others about it. I had a 1-hour training with Thomas Huddleston. It was great, but it didn't cover. I don't know. I probably mentioned some of these. I'm not sure. There were like 5 guidelines we were supposed to remember, and these were not in there. There was other material. There's a task guide that sometimes support volunteers are asked to read, but my guess is that they seldom do, and I find it almost unreadable and not very. It's like it could be like a doorstop. It's big, and you ask others about other volunteers, and they've never seen it. And then there's just really a question around that, which I'm sure you've already thought about because of the way you already think. It's just something I'm wondering about specifically for support volunteers, if that's going to continue to be, a thing. And underlying, it seems to me like there's maybe been an assumption, and it may be a correct assumption, that brand new volunteers won't tolerate this much education. So how do you give it to them in little bites? That may all be true. Then there's this sort of more abstract kind of like theoretical thing about how do you build a learning organization? How do you instill practices where you're constantly learning, where people are constantly learning it, not only through the way that groups are formed, training modules, or and the way documents are maintained. Case in point, and I hope I'm not getting too into the weeds here, but I'm working on creating training content for helping people with transportation independence in this program, and I intend to make it like fully editable at any time. How do we make it, if it can be made better, make it easy to make it better, make it easy to hear how it needs to be made better.
And fully shareable?
Not yet.
It will be. It'll be shareable, translated, all these things.
Yeah.
Nick, I feel like you unmuted for a reason.
Well, I feel like I ought to participate.
You don't have to, but you're very welcome.
No, come on.
All right, I will.
Come on in, Nick.
So I didn't read the required material. I heard what you're talking about, and I've been trying to practice it. I'm both encouraged and disappointed that you're talking about the same problems we are, and that you've still got them. I was hoping a bunch of people here would have solved these kinds of things. I want to go back to stuff. These concepts of we've been using the word accompaniment. That's the one I've been using. My experience is it happens one-on-one. I don't know how you teach it, and apparently you guys don't really either. I don't think this is really the best format, kind of for things like Millicent said. It's hard to get people to want to take the time. I've had experience in the last year on 2 what we call support teams for 2 different families, maybe 3 different families. How do I know? Remember even. And dedicated people come in, and they get right into it. And some of them deal with these issues, the heroism, the martyrdom, trying to solve the problems of people, and some, get better. And well, people come with you various levels of humility, that. And people get tired. And they have to take care of themselves. Nobody understands how involved we get with people, and
Right.
for some people that's draining, for others it's invigorating. And so
I guess I would ask, to that, like, I think you're saying that no one understands how involved people get. I guess what I think that this module is trying to ask us is like, why do we get so involved? Like, what is the purpose of that? And who does that serve?
okay, well, I could stand to read that part, and I was going to try to, but I didn't get to it.
Whatever. I also
I wanted to
yeah.
I wanted to enter a different place just for a moment, because between what Nick said and Millicent said, there's an interesting thing to learn, which is and I'll say what we learned is what Nick says, people don't want to spend a lot of time training early on. But what we find, to what Millicent has said, is that after people have been doing it for a little while, suddenly they're saying, do you have any training materials around? Or
Yeah.
can we talk about this? Or how does that work? So it's trying to deliver the educational opportunity, or the learning opportunity, to Millicent's term, at the right moment when people need it. And that's not easy. Again, I'm an aficionado of the term learning organization, but they are hard to build and hard to maintain.
And sometimes
I mean, that's what we're trying to do here, frankly, is experiment with how do we do that?
Right. I mean, the right moment is when people are ready, right? That's the thing. And yes, there's a certain amount of information people have to have before they start the work, but people are going to absorb what they're going to absorb. And so how do you hedge against that? It's this thing of the learning organization and building a culture, because, you can put people through a 8-hour training and everybody will get something different out of that 8-hour training, right? We're all different learners. But if there's also kind of a robust culture that people are then entering into, where things are reinforced or that they're helped and supported through their experiential learning, all those things, it all works out, and so there isn't like one strategy for learning. And, we're all different learners, and life is messy. But first of all, I love that term accompaniment. And I do think that, I agree that you can't just teach this work. But on the other hand, a lot of people are very good at, taking parallel experiences and extrapolating. And also, it does help, I think, for people to have vocabulary coming into it. And so you may be teaching concepts that don't really resonate for people, but then when they have the experience, they have language for it, which that alone, I think, is, if nothing else, I say what we're trying to do with this stuff is create some more shared vocabulary, so that we can talk about this stuff better and like learn faster and transmit knowledge across, better. That's not the only goal. I just mean, like, at the very least, like having words for this, having words, mindsets and cultural humility and accompaniment. It's like, I didn't have those words a year ago or 6 months ago,
Right.
Yeah.
And people or teams will react differently. I've had on my mind today 2 of our teams, one of which had basically had a celebration with their family and said, "Go with God. You're doing great. Call us if you need us." And that worked great for everybody. So the team stopped meeting. They were meeting every week. They stopped meeting. They still talk to each other, but they've stopped meeting. The family's going on. Today, one of the people in that got her letter approving her asylum, and the whole team came together like that to organize a party on Friday night. We're going to be there. Who's bringing chairs? Who's bringing a salad? Who's got the cake? What's going to happen? Everybody in. It happened like that. The other team, and I've mentioned this before, refuses to let go. They have been with their family for a year and 3/4 now, and they just won't stop. They keep carting the kids around and doing this and funding that, and it's like, so we've got this one team way over here and one team way over here.
Uh-huh.
And some of that's human behavior and their desire and need.
Yeah.
It just, but that's one of the things we're grappling with is different understandings of what they're doing. And frankly, we don't have any control here. They're volunteers. They're going to do what they want to do. So you just hope it's an informed choice.
So I'm not sure if Stephanie is there. If Stephanie, if you want to, we're kind of doing the first thing on the second thing on the agenda, but we're also doing, we're doing first impressions, but also kind of talking about what to do with this information, which I like. I like that we kind of jumped into that too, of like, that is great. Stephanie, if you're there, you're welcome to unmute and talk, or not, also welcome to listen. I am going to throw up on the screen for this. Can you see on, no, you can't. I'm going to click on share screen and I'm going to throw up the reflection reminders again, just to have some more words on this. So these are some of the prompts, and I mean, I like all of them actually, but I wanted people to have a chance to sort of, you don't have to respond to these literally, but I would like us to talk a little bit more personally about this. You know, we kind of end up talking about things from a distance, and I like that these prompts are sort of asking us, you know, to say like, what are you going to do to sort of, you know, manage your expectations, and like, how do you think about, you know, what is a compassionate lens for you, and how do you kind of like check yourself in a way, or manage your expectations. So I mean, I think we've touched on some of this, but I want us to talk a little bit more about maybe some of the ways, maybe some experiences where we have kind of corrected ourselves or developed some of that cultural humility, and maybe some thoughts on like how to approach this work with kind of an intentionality around this. And I may often come back to, you know, what Juliet always starts with this, the story of like, you know, how she messed up by doing too much kind of thing, but that's an example. So I'll give a kind of a relatively simple example, you know, of a response to this, which is, you know, from the very beginning, doing this kind of work. Like we started meeting several months ago, and it was Martha and Greg Rashane and Jeff and sometimes other people, and just talking about the need to have more of a space to talk about stuff in that was not task oriented, and you know, that there'd be a need for education and things like that, but in some ways also just, you know, how do we create. And maybe what I'm getting at is this idea that the learning organization may not be the organization to which you volunteer, but maybe it's, you know, an ecosystem of people, of a community of volunteers. So for me, in some ways, doing this activity was sort of an answer to some of these questions. Like, how do we make it easier for people to talk about and think about being compassionate and to be kind of accountable to themselves about how they're doing this work and how they're growing in this work, and how do we make opportunities for people to do this, to do these kinds of things. And, you know, in theory, there's some content delivery, but that this is in some ways exactly what the purpose of this like training is to create these kinds of conversations.
Can I jump in on this? Because this notion of the ability, I'm honing in on this middle bullet about how do we be collaborative, and I'm thinking, I know there's the intention of this as we think about it is how do we be collaborative with the newcomers that we're welcoming. But I think it's also really important to be thinking about, as someone else mentioned, how do we do that within our teams? And being collaborative, it just takes time. And that it takes time, whether it's, when are we actually going to sit down with the newcomer and really talk seriously about how much money was spent last month and how much money is going to be spent next month, and not do that in a super tasky way, but in a way that's in the context of how that fits with your goals and the fact that you're going to have a work permit in 3.5 months, or, how do we have that conversation that we all know we have to have, right? But it takes time. And that's also true among, how do we talk about mindsets together, right? What does it mean and how does it feel to ourselves? But we've only recently started having up in the Upper Valley conversations among the support teams, just a, kind of a monthly update with all the support teams, what's going on. And those are pretty tasky, this is what happened with this person, this is what happened with that person. But people are then able to, even as they talk about their tasks, other people are able to, be in awe and help when, soothe them if things aren't going well. Or so it's kind of this, even though the collaboration is around things that have to get done, if we do it in the right way and give it enough time, then some of these mindsets just emerge, right? If enough people around the table kind of have this patience and respect and support for one another, which I haven't been around a table with settlement people where there isn't enough of that around the table.
But this comes to something, Millicent, I think, forgive me if I'm wrong in how I'm interpreting this, but I think this is kind of what you were getting at, like that if we have to practice these things with each other, right? As within our volunteer groups and in these kinds of conversations, in order to be able to behave that way with the newcomers that we're working with, and that this is sort of like a way of being that's, internal before it can be external.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In addition to the collaborative, I was also focused on the last bullet of accountability. I mean, how do you be responsible to something other than your own judgment about, they call it the ABCDs, but also simply being responsible in terms of how you relate to whoever it is you're co-sponsoring or caring for or volunteering to support. How do you stay accountable for that and not get sort of off the reservation, or to use Julia's terms, do things you shouldn't have done? So there's a responsibility here in addition to a collaborative team feeling, and this is some way you have to do both of those.
Yeah, I guess what I was trying to say is around, I unmuted the wrong thing, sorry. Around that accountability conversation, if we can give it enough time, we just so often don't have that. We're checking lists, or, we have a consent agenda for a meeting. And if we can give ourselves a little more time around those accountability conversations or those accountability activities, then that kind of allows a little more of the other space, and it encourages then the accountability is kind of authentic, right? It's not checking boxes. Anyway, I appreciate that. It's a tricky space.
One of the things I went searching for as soon as I finished this key mindsets module was, it's backwards in there. It's the characteristics of white supremacy culture. One of the best DEI trainings I've ever done, that was kind of a workplace DEI training, really focused on these things that are, there's a whole bunch of them, but the top few really speak to, and I think in general, this speaks really well to that sort of this like cultural humility and kind of having to manage expectations and adapt and blah, 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 because the first one is perfectionism, right? This, idea that there's one way that things have to be done and that you are the arbiter of that. And the second one is a sense of urgency. So I think I love this sort of talking about time, you know, and our attitude about time. That is our cultural bias in many ways. And it gets in the way of our being adaptive and learning and in a lot of the ways in which we need to be present for this work. And it's, you know, it's real typical of like white people, especially white Northeastern US people, like to think of ourselves as being like culture neutral, you know? And so white supremacy culture is not my favorite terminology because it puts a lot of people off and it makes them feel really like defensive. But I think like white people culture is a great way of putting it. And so this helps me a lot because as much as I love the way this is positively framed, it really helps me to understand what the negative version is because I'm better able to see it in myself. You know, so when I see something, you know, patience, someone can say patience. I'm like, yes, patience is super important. But when someone says like, your sense of urgency is a problem, I'm like, oh, okay, right, I get it. Like it's somehow I'm more able to identify where I need to improve or be accountable. If I can sort of name the thing I'm doing wrong. So. And this is also why, you know, one of the trainings or classes discussions we want to do, I think we'll close soon, is a DEI training. We just have to figure out sort of how to find the right people and kind of frame it, because I do think that a good DEI training helps us be a little more aware of like the characteristics that they're like what they taste like water. They're like air. We don't notice them because they're natural to us. It's our environment. But I think, you know, helping us see how others may see us, how the people we're working with may perceive it. They may not have the same language for it, but they're certainly perceiving that sense of perfection or urgency or judgment or whatever. You know, can be useful to us to see ourselves a little bit more as they may. We had set aside an hour and a half, and part of that was sort of like, if there's, you know, 8 or 10 people, we need a lot more time to talk about stuff. But I feel like we can work towards closing soon, because I think that I think everyone, you know, kind of covered what we've got here. And I think what I originally thought was that we would go through the whole kind of group discussion format. I didn't realize how tasky it was. And I don't think that's appropriate for this group. So what I want to do is sort of give us a few more minutes to just kind of say our piece, and then I'm going to ask folks if anyone has any, like, we're going to have another discussion next week, and it will be the same basic discussion, but it'll probably be different people that show up. You're always welcome to come again. It's just to give people different times when they can come. And then I kind of expect that people will might not want to continue as it gets more and more detailed into the co-sponsorship stuff. So I'm sort of just interested in hearing, you know, from you guys, you know, Millicent and Nick, like whether that's the case. I mean, there's technically a couple more modules in this training. You know, we'll continue to do it. I don't know if you're, you know, interested in continuing to go through that content.
Well, I'm
Is
willing to
Nick-
continue.
You go ahead.
Okay, I'm willing to continue. The times haven't worked out very well for me. I also want to say that, well, hell, I'm curious. I need to learn stuff, and I still can. And it occurs to me with the list of topics and trying to get people to talk about these, we've all talked about, well, teams. And so I do have team meetings, and I participate in some. And I think something I'm taking away from this is, as part of one of these team meetings, to interject one of these words and talk about it amongst, you know, the people that are there trying to, you know, solve all these problems and stuff, and are dedicated as can be and to, talk about compassion. Well, what does that mean? Talk about collaboration and what does that mean? And it's an opportunity. So I'm going to do that.
Great.
And I'm sorry, Carolyn, I had my screen share and I didn't see that you were still there. I'm sorry. I see you now. So.
Is Carolyn speaking?
Yeah, so, yeah, I mean, I'm interested in continuing, and I feel like the discussion today has been really helpful and wonderful. Yeah.
I'm going to respond to that question. I'm interested in continuing. I have seen things that, like, I don't know if I want to be a co-sponsor. And so it's possible, depending on what happens, that I get to material that I'm like, this is going down a path that I don't at this time see myself in, but I don't really know. And I see, I think it's also could be, interesting to be prepared for something in case I do want to. Like right now, what I'm trying to do is shift what I have been doing into a situation where I feel like I'm being more valuable than I was in making a difference for the program. And I feel like I'm starting to carve out something that is like a project that I can do that. And that certainly won't leave me time to be a co-sponsor while that project is happening. But that project is probably going to end. I mean, I would envision it like handing it off in some way to somebody else or some other, it's going to take another life form.
Yep.
And then what I'm trying to do is bring it into being, and just give it some legs. And so, meanwhile, down the line, am I like, oh, I want to be a co-sponsor, and I now want to know what it's about. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it.
So I feel like I keep coming in with a terminology thing because I'm getting sort of swirling around. But to me, the co-sponsorship is the whole thing the community does.
Yep.
And so one of the elements of it is being part of the individual's support team, right? Each individual or family's support team. But another piece of it is we have, support teams, and then we have resource teams, is those individuals that are helping, we got a whole group of people that are just swirling around, getting English to each person in the way that they can do that. And it's very targeted. Some of it is very project oriented. I'm going to get these group of people ready in their English for this one thing. And we need all of that as part of the co-sponsorship or community sponsorship experience. We need people who can focus on things and get them done while the support teams are, doing the hug and helping with those ongoing activities. So I love hearing, in this group, the range of kind of individual experiences we're getting to appreciate, right? The other piece that I just wanted to mention quickly that came up in our thoughts about this training is that there's some folks who've had a fair amount of experience and we're thinking, I don't want to only be talking about these basic topics, and there's some things that we want to be able to dive into in greater detail. And it could be something like a project area, whether it's around transportation or whether it's around legal support or whatever it could be, that it helps for a small group of people to really dive in together on. But it also could be around something like one of the things that keeps coming up in just really every setting that we've talked about this is trauma-informed care, and just our understanding of how to deal with recognizing trauma, how to make sure that care providers understand trauma. Part of that is a mindset thing, and part of that is, getting a group of people together to talk in more depth about that. So I want to make sure and lob that into this conversation while we're exploring what do we do with these pieces that we do need to explore. Can we use this a broader learning organization across this Vermont group of people? Can we use this as a way of helping to explore some of those narrower topics or more targeted topics?
And that is, I mean, it's kind of a tricky thing because so many people have asked for, like, I want a lot more training on this or a lot more training on that, including trauma. And I think it's that thing of, first, like, are you treating someone for trauma? Like, are you diagnosing someone? And like, and in some ways, when I've looked at, I haven't, deeply educated myself, but some of the things that I have read that are limited, a lot of what this is talking about, the key mindsets, is trauma informed, right? It's about being, very, self-aware, compassionate, transparent, clear, having boundaries. That those are the fundamentals of trauma informed care. And I think that, we could repackage it for people in a way that makes them feel like they're getting it. And that's fine. I think that's, that's one of the questions to answer is like, what is the format in which, or the, the wrapping around things that people need to be ready to accept it? Back to the question of like, who needs this? How do we get it to them? But I think, a lot of the people that have asked for a lot more deep stuff are not a lot. Some of the people I know who want to go so much deeper are some of the biggest violators of the basics. Right. And, I'll just leave it there, but I think you all know what I'm talking about. Right. So, I think understanding, where we begin and end as volunteers is such a fundamental thing and so hard. Because we're all, if we didn't have some hubris, we wouldn't be doing this, So.
Hi, Jen. I don't know if you can hear me.
Oh, yes. Great. Hi.
Hi, this is Stephanie. I can't seem to get, I'm on my phone, can't seem to get a picture, but I apologize. I'm coming on a little late, so I did not hear the beginning of it, but just in answer to the question, yes, I'd like to continue to be part of the conversation and hear these conversations. So I find it interesting and helpful, and yeah, so count me in.
Great. And what we will do is we'll kind of do, similarly, we'll send a reminder out about kind of doing the next, it's really kind of 2 modules because it's the rest of the discussion module and then the deep dive stuff. And then we'll schedule 2 additional kind of discussion times after that. So Jack and I will confer on that and get that information out to you. But I think what we've been doing is we've been having this conversation that touches more of the big picture about like, what else is needed, right? And I think, that you're welcome to that conversation. That's what Jeff and Martha and formerly Greg, we were spending a lot of time mulling over, like, what are the ways in which we can help to build and advance kind of a volunteer culture. And we knew that we were opening a can of worms, right? That there would be a lot of needs and a lot of, we need capacity and people need more. We wish certain partners behave different ways, but I think the question we can sort of direct ourselves towards is like, what could we do? Like, what is possible to do to build, right? As a learning organization that kind of wraps around it all, or is underneath it all, or is up here, whatever. And because I think there's a lot that's possible, and there are models out there in communities where there are community-based organizations that then affiliate to support refugees and asylum seekers, different kinds of organizations, but they are not bound to any specific relationship, and they are, I think that's what we're kind of wondering about is, what could we build that meets that rises to the cause, that we're all talking about, and can then support, the activities of a variety of different entities, and CASP, ECDC, and whatever comes into play, welcome core folks, but also creates sort of this relatively cohesive learning organization that is the community network. So,
could I add one thought?
Please.
And it seems to me that we're all gathered because we're tentatively sticking our feet in and saying, yes, we want to do this better. We don't want to make these errors. We want help with this. So when we come to the group with that premise, we have to trust the group will not shame us or embarrass us or find us lacking, but will help us in the best way to maybe role play a different way to do it, or how to think about it a different way. But that if there is that opportunity to bring that either one-on-one or with a group, with a feeling that we're going to be supported to do it better, and that we all make those errors, I think that's the kind of community we want, and that we can turn to one another. And the more we see that modeled and dealt with in a respectful way, the more that will propagate itself into the culture of the volunteer community.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think, Stephanie, one of the pieces that maybe you didn't hear in the beginning is from a few of the folks who've been involved for a longer time, is I think we're all entering this with even more humility than we did when we started. So we're all learning so much more along the way, that it is the mix of fresh new thoughts and ideas and our old stuff that I think makes a nice mix. And as always, you articulated nicely some of the framing that's so important. And sometimes we don't say out loud, but just assume. So thank you.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And and in addition to all that hard stuff, also like a place to share the joy and the like, wow, this is like still to me regularly amazing, so like that's just, it's an incredible thing that so many people who are so smart and capable are direct their intention into this work, and yeah, it's amazing. So I'm going to wrap it up because folks are starting to need to leave, and you will receive some email reminders about proceeding through the next stuffs. Again, please feel free to come to the discussion next week as well, or not. None of this is meant to feel like another obligation, but it's great. I benefit a lot from this. I had not realized until like the second conversation how much this really served my own selfish purposes, because as staff, we don't get to really talk about this or in this way, right? We're so task oriented. So it's really thank you. Really, I feel like honored to be a part of this, and it's my job a lot more meaningful than just fighting about grants and stuff. So yeah.
Thank you for helping put this together, Jennifer.
Really huge.
We're gonna keep on keeping on. All right, have a beautiful evening. See some of you
Thanks,
next
everybody.
week. Thank you. Bye. Millicent, I hope you're feeling better.